Emily Carter had always believed that her marriage was difficult, but she never imagined that one day she would be thrown out of her own home with absolutely nothing, as if she had never been a part of it at all. That night did not come out of nowhere. In truth, it was only the final scene of a decision that had been written for her long ago. The living room was completely silent. Even the ticking of the wall clock felt like a scream in Emily's ears. Sitting across from her on the couch was her husband, Daniel Carter, arms crossed, face cold and emotionless. Beside him sat his mother, Margaret Carter, and his father, Richard Carter. Their expressions were hard, almost as if a courtroom verdict was about to be announced. Emily spoke softly. "Daniel, you said we would talk," Daniel replied without even looking at her. "The talking is already done, Emily." Her heart began to race. "What do you mean? It's done," Margaret said in a cold voice. "It means you are no longer fit for this house." Emily straightened up. "Fit? I'm your wife." Richard slammed his hand on the table. Being a wife and being part of this family are two very different things. Emily's throat went dry. "What are you saying?" Daniel finally looked at her, but there was no love in his eyes, only exhaustion and indifference. "You won't be staying here after tonight." It felt as if the ground disappeared beneath Emily's feet. "You're throwing me out?" Daniel said calmly. "The divorce has already been filed. You'll receive the notice." "Divorce?" Emily nearly shouted. "Without telling me, without even talking to me." Margaret smirked. "Do you really think you deserve an explanation?" Emily's hands began to tremble. "What is my fault?" Silence. Then Richard spoke. "You don't belong to our family's level. You have no background, no powerful family, no legacy." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "Daniel, you know my mother passed away. My father too." Margaret cut her off. "Exactly. You have no one, and people with no one have no rights in this house." Those words pierced Emily's chest. "No one." Daniel stood up. "You can take your belongings, whatever is personally yours." Emily let out a breath of relief. "Okay, I'll pack my bag. But," Daniel continued, "the jewelry, the clothes we bought, the gifts, everything stays here." Emily was stunned. "That's mine. It was given to me after the marriage." Margaret said harshly. "It wasn't given. You were only allowed to wear it." Emily touched her neck. The same necklace Daniel had given her on their first anniversary. "Daniel, please." Daniel turned his face away. "Take it off." Her hands shook as she removed the necklace, then the bangles, then the ring. With every piece she took off, it felt as though her dignity, her identity, was being stripped away as well. She made one last attempt. "Where will I go?" Richard pointed toward the door. "That's not our problem." That night, Emily stepped out of the house, wearing only her coat, carrying her phone and purse. No suitcase, no cash, no plan. The door closed behind her, and the Carter house officially erased her. Standing under the streetlight, Emily didn't cry. She felt empty. There was only one question, echoing in her mind: am I really nothing? She didn't know then that the people calling her no one would one day be unable to speak when her name was read aloud in court. Because this was not just the beginning of a divorce case. It was the start of a battle between power, arrogance, and truth. And when the judge would speak her full name, the entire courtroom would freeze. If you're enjoying this story so far, please subscribe to the channel. Your support gives me the motivation to keep bringing you powerful courtroom stories like this. Emily Carter did not sleep that night. She sat on a cold bench outside a 24-hour cafe, her coat wrapped tightly around her body, watching cars pass by, as if the world had decided to move on without her. Her phone battery was dying. Her bank account showed a number, so small it felt insulting. And yet, the pain that weighed on her chest was heavier than hunger, heavier than fear. She had been erased from a house, but she refused to be erased from her own life. At sunrise, Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to beg, she wasn't going to disappear, and she certainly wasn't going to accept being thrown away like she had no value. That morning, she walked into a small legal aid office, tucked between a pharmacy and a closed-down bookstore. The sign on the door read, "Family Law and Civil Rights." Inside, the office was quiet. No luxury furniture, no expensive artwork, just shelves of law books, stacks of files, and the smell of old paper. A man in his late 30s looked up from behind the desk. "Can I help you, Emily?" Hesitated. Her voice felt weak, but her resolve wasn't. "I need a lawyer." The man gestured to the chair. "I'm Michael Reynolds. Sit down." As Emily spoke, everything poured out. The sudden divorce filing, the way she was thrown out, the jewelry taken from her, the words "you have no one," echoing in her ears. Michael listened, without interrupting. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look bored. He looked focused. When she finished, there was a pause. "They evicted you without notice," he said slowly. "That's illegal." Emily blinked. "It is? And confiscating your personal gifts?" He shook his head. "Also illegal." For the first time, since the night before, Emily felt something shift inside her. "But they're powerful," she said quietly. "His family. They own half the town." Michael leaned back. "Power doesn't replace the law." He opened a notepad. "I'll need your documents, ID, marriage certificate. Anything you have." Emily handed him her driver's license and a folded copy of her marriage certificate. Michael studied the name carefully. Emily Eleanor Carter. His pen paused. He looked up. "Eleanor? Yes, it's my middle name. Your mother's name." Emily nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he typed something into his computer, his expression unreadable. A minute passed, then two. Finally, he looked at Emily with a seriousness that made her sit up straight. "Emily," he said carefully, "do you know anything about your biological family?" Her stomach tightened. "No, I grew up in foster care. I was told there was nothing, no one." Michael turned the screen, slightly toward her, though the legal text meant nothing to her yet. That may not be entirely true. Emily felt dizzy. "What do you mean?" Michael exhaled. "Your middle name, your records. There's something here, something tied to a trust dispute from years ago. It's not public knowledge, but in legal circles, the name Eleanor carries weight." Emily shook her head. "I don't understand. I've never had money. I've never had influence." Michael nodded, which makes this even more interesting. Before she could respond, the office phone rang. Michael answered, listened for a few seconds, then hung up. "That was your husband's attorney," he said calmly. Emily's heart dropped already. "He's requesting a quick settlement, no court, minimal compensation, confidential." Emily laughed bitterly. "Of course he is." Michael leaned forward. "This is important. People don't rush settlements unless they're afraid of something." Emily swallowed. "Afraid of what?" Michael closed the file. "Afraid of what happens when a judge asks questions." 2 days later, Emily stood at the courthouse steps. The building was massive. Stone walls, tall columns, flags fluttering in the wind. She felt small walking inside, surrounded by confident lawyers and people who looked like they belonged there. Daniel was already inside. He stood, with his attorney, perfectly dressed, whispering and laughing softly, as if this were nothing more than a formality. When he saw Emily, his smile vanished. "You really came," he muttered as she passed. Emily didn't answer. Inside the courtroom, the judge entered. Everyone rose. Emily's case number was called. Michael stood beside her, calm and steady. Daniel's attorney spoke first. Your Honor, this is a straightforward divorce. The petitioner left the marital home voluntarily. Emily clenched her fists. Michael stood. Your Honor, that statement is false. My client was forcibly removed, deprived of her belongings, and left without financial support. Daniel's attorney scoffed. There is no proof, no witnesses. She has no family to support her claim. The judge turned to Emily. Mrs. Carter, is that true? Emily took a breath. I may not have family present in this courtroom, she said, her voice steady, but I do have the truth. The judge nodded slowly. We'll see. A date was set for evidence submission. As they exited the courtroom, Daniel stepped closer. You're making a mistake, he whispered. Walk away now. Emily looked him in the eye, for the first time without fear. No, she said quietly, you made the mistake when you thought I was nothing. That night, Michael called her. I ran deeper checks. He said, Emily, when your name is formally entered into the record next hearing, things are going to change. Emily closed her eyes. Change how? Michael's voice was serious. Because some names don't just identify a person. They remind the system of its past. If you've already subscribed to the channel, please write yes in the comments. So I know you're with me. The second hearing arrived faster than Emily expected. In the days leading up to it, her life had changed in quiet but important ways. Michael Reynolds worked late every night, digging through archives, sealed records, and old civil filings connected to one name, Eleanor. Emily didn't fully understand what he was looking for, only that every time he called her, his tone grew more serious. This case isn't small anymore, he told her. The night before the hearing, and tomorrow, the court is going to realize that too. Emily stood in front of the courthouse mirror that morning, adjusting the collar of a simple navy blue blazer. Michael had insisted she wear, not too expensive, he'd said, but strong, respectable. You're not asking for sympathy. You're asserting your rights. When she walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere felt different. From the first hearing, heavier, tenser. Daniel sat at the defense table, his jaw tight, his foot tapping against the floor. His attorney, Charles Whitman, flipped through documents with exaggerated confidence, but his eyes kept darting toward Michael. The judge entered. Be seated. Emily's case was called. Michael rose first. Your Honor, we are submitting evidence related to unlawful eviction, ET confiscation, and spousal neglect. Charles immediately stood. Objection. This is being turned into a spectacle. The respondent denies all allegations. The judge raised a hand. Objection noted. Proceed, Mr. Reynolds. Michael approached the bench and handed over a file. Medical records, he said, dated the night Mrs. Carter was removed from her home. Panic-induced hypertension, treated at an emergency clinic. Daniel stiffened. Michael continued. We also submit a sworn statement from a neighbor who witnessed Mrs. Carter being escorted out past midnight with no luggage. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Charles scoffed. A neighbor's opinion is hardly... It's not an opinion, the judge interrupted. It's testimony. Emily's heart pounded as the judge reviewed the documents. Then Michael paused. And finally, Your Honor, we request the court accept supplemental documentation regarding the petitioner's identity and legal background that got everyone's attention. Charles frowned. Relevance? Michael's voice was calm, extremely relevant. The judge nodded. You may submit. Michael handed over another folder, thicker than the rest. Daniel leaned toward his attorney. What is this? Charles whispered back. I don't know. The judge flipped through the pages, slowly, very slowly. The courtroom felt frozen. Then the judge looked up. "Mr. Reynolds, this documentation references an Eleanor trust." "Yes, Your Honor." Emily's breath caught. "Th." E-judge adjusted his glasses. "This trust has been cited in multiple civil precedents." Charles stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is unrelated to a divorce proceeding." Michael responded instantly. "On the contrary, the defense's primary argument is that Mrs. Carter has no standing, no support, and no leverage. This documentation directly contradicts that narrative." Silence. The judge turned to Daniel. "Mr. Carter, were you aware of this?" Daniel swallowed. "No, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Interesting." Michael continued, "We are not here to litigate the trust today. We are here to establish that Mrs. Carter was misrepresented, mistreated, and unlawfully removed under the assumption that she was powerless." Daniel's attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned back. "Mr. Whitman, I strongly advise you to reconsider your strategy." For the first time, Emily saw fear flicker across Daniel's face. The judge spoke again. "This court orders interim spousal support, effective immediately. Additionally, all personal property removed from Mrs. Carter must be inventoried and preserved." Daniel's head snapped up. "Your Honor, enough," the judge said sharply. "You've had ample opportunity to act reasonably." The gavel struck. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, not of sadness, but of validation. Outside the courtroom, Daniel approached her. "This is getting out of hand," he said, through clenched teeth. "You don't even know what you're dragging up." Emily met his gaze. "You should have thought about that before you threw me out." He scoffed. "You think some old papers scare me?" Michael stepped between them. "Actually," he said calmly, "they should." Daniel stormed away. As Emily and Michael descended the courthouse steps, she finally asked the question that had been burning inside her. "What is the Eleanor Trust?" Michael stopped walking. "It was established decades ago," he said carefully, quietly, "and it was designed to protect heirs who didn't even know they were heirs." Emily's voice trembled. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Michael interrupted gently, "that when your full name is officially entered into the court record next hearing, people are going to recognize it." Emily looked back at the courthouse. For the first time, it didn't feel like a place of fear. It felt like a place of truth. And somewhere, inside those walls, her name was no longer invisible. The night after the second hearing, Emily Carter sat alone in her small rented room, staring at the ceiling as if it might give her answers. Her phone lay beside her, silent for once. No threats, no fake apologies, just an unsettling quiet. That quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the calm before something irreversible. Michael Reynolds had warned her. Earlier that day, once certain doors open in court, he'd said, they don't close easily. Emily was beginning to understand what he meant. The next morning, Michael called her, earlier than usual. "Emily," he said, skipping any greeting, "I need you to come to my office, now." Something in his voice made her sit up straight. "Did something happen?" "Yes," he replied, "and I'd rather tell you in person." When Emily arrived, Michael was already standing, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. His desk was covered with documents, old ones, yellowed pages, sealed envelopes, stamps from courts that hadn't existed in decades. He gestured for her to sit. "What I'm about to tell you," he said carefully, "is not speculation. It's verified." Emily clasped her hands together. "Okay." Michael slid one file toward her. On the cover was a typed label. Emily's breath caught. That name again. Michael nodded. The trust was created 42 years ago by Eleanor Whitmore, a woman whose estate quietly funded hospitals, legal defense funds, and educational grants, without ever attaching her name publicly. Emily frowned. Why hide it? Because, Michael said, Eleanor Whitmore was involved in a legal war that nearly destroyed her family. When she won, she didn't want attention. She wanted protection for her bloodline. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. Michael continued. The trust had one unusual condition. If an heir was ever disowned, erased, or stripped of dignity through abuse of power, the trust would activate legal protection. Emily's voice barely worked. You're saying, this trust exists for people like me? Michael met her eyes. I'm saying it exists. T.S. Because of people like you. He opened the file and pointed to a page. There was a child listed as a protected beneficiary. The record was sealed. After a custody dispute, that child was removed from public inheritance listings and placed under state protection. Emily leaned forward. The name on the page made her heart stop. Emily Eleanor Whitmore, later amended to Emily Eleanor Carter. Her ears rang. That's my name, she whispered. Michael nodded. Your legal name? Your original name? Emily shook her head, in disbelief. No, that's not possible. I grew up in foster care. No one ever told me, because they weren't allowed to, Michael said. The trust ensured anonymity until a triggering condition occurred. Emily swallowed hard. What condition? Michael closed the file gently. Being wrongfully stripped of your rights. The room felt too small, too heavy. Emily stood up, pacing, so my entire life, the reason I was told I had no family, was to keep you safe, Michael said, or so they claimed. Emily stopped. And Daniel? Michael's expression darkened. Daniel Carter's law firm has crossed paths with this trust before, not directly, but close enough to know better. Emily felt anger surge through her chest. You mean they knew? I can't prove that yet, Michael said, but I can prove this. The moment Daniel's attorney saw your middle name paired with certain registry numbers, he panicked. Emily remembered Charles Whitman's face in court. The hesitation, the sudden silence. It made sense now. Michael continued. The Carter family built their influence by exploiting people they thought were invisible. They assumed you had no backing. Emily laughed bitterly. They said I was nothing. Michael looked at her steadily. And that's exactly what activated the trust. There was a knock at the door. Michael opened it to find a courier holding a sealed envelope. He signed for it, closed the door, and handed the envelope to Emily. It came an hour ago, he said, from the opposing counsel. Emily opened it. Inside was a formal letter. Michael let out a dry chuckle that didn't take long. Emily looked up. They're scared. Yes, Michael said, because if this goes to full discovery, every asset transfer, every unethical eviction, every abuse of leverage becomes public record. Emily's hands trembled, not with fear, but with something new. Power, not the kind Daniel's family used, the kind that comes from truth. Michael lowered his voice. There's something else. Emily braced herself. The judge has requested a sealed briefing, he said, about the trust, about you. Her heart skipped. Is that bad? No, Michael replied. It means the court is paying attention. Emily exhaled slowly. For the first time, she wasn't reacting anymore. She was standing. That evening, Daniel called her. She didn't answer. He called again. Then again. Finally, she picked up. What do you want? She asked. Calmly. Daniel's voice was tight. What did you do? Emily smiled faintly. I told the truth. You're dragging things. That should have stayed buried, he snapped. You don't understand the consequences. Emily's voice was steady. Neither did you. When you threw me out. Silence. Then Daniel said something that confirmed everything. Just take the settlement, he muttered. You don't need to prove anything. Emily replied softly. I already have. She hung up. As she stood by the window that night, city lights glowing below, Emily finally understood something her younger self never had. She was never invisible. She was hidden. And now, the file that was never meant to be opened was sitting on a judge's desk, waiting. Section 5. The courtroom felt different. The day Emily returned for the next hearing, it wasn't louder, it wasn't fuller, it was quieter. The kind of quiet that comes when people know something important is about to happen, but no one is sure exactly what. Emily walked in beside Michael Reynolds, her posture straight, her expression calm. Gone was the woman who had once entered this building, afraid of being ignored. Today, eyes followed her, not with pity, but with curiosity. At the defense table, Daniel Carter sat rigidly. His expensive confidence had cracked. His attorney, Charles Whitman, leaned in close, whispering urgently, flipping through papers far more aggressively than before. Daniel didn't whisper back. He just stared at Emily. The judge entered. All rise. When everyone sat again, the judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Emily's case file. Before we proceed, the judge said slowly, this court has reviewed the sealed briefing requested in the previous session. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Charles Whitman stood, Your Honor. Before anything further, the defense would like to reiterate its request for private mediation. The judge didn't look at him. That request is denied. Daniel's jaw tightened. Michael rose calmly. Your Honor, we are prepared to proceed. The judge nodded. Good. He turned a page, in the file, then another. Mrs. Carter, the judge said, finally looking up at Emily, this court has confirmed that documentation submitted regarding your identity and legal status is accurate. Emily felt her heartbeat in her ears. The court also recognizes, the judge continued, that certain assumptions were made by the respondent based on the belief that you lacked support, resources, or standing. The judge paused. That belief was incorrect. A ripple moved through the courtroom, subtle but unmistakable. Charles Whitman stood abruptly, Your Honor. With respect, this proceeding is a divorce case, not a historical review of unrelated trusts. The judge's gaze sharpened. Mr. Whitman, this proceeding concerns motive. Silence. Michael spoke next. Your Honor, the defense's actions, unlawful eviction, asset seizure, and coercive settlement attempts were rooted in the assumption that my client could not respond. He gestured gently toward Emily. They assumed wrong. Daniel finally stood. This is being exaggerated. The judge looked at him directly. Mr. Carter, sit down. Daniel froze. He sat. The judge turned back to the file. The court has also reviewed correspondence submitted after the last hearing, specifically a mediation request issued within hours of sealed verification. Charles shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued. That timing is notable. Michael allowed himself a single step forward. Your Honor, we submit that the defense attempted to suppress disclosure once they understood the broader implications. The judge nodded slowly. Agreed. Daniel exhaled sharply, his composure slipping. The judge addressed the room. This court orders immediate continuation of proceedings. No further delays, no private settlements, unless initiated by the petitioner. Emily's breath caught. She had the control now. The judge looked at Emily again. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to proceed? Emily stood. Yes, she said clearly. I do. Her voice didn't shake. For the first time, Daniel looked away. Michael continued, presenting the next phase of evidence, bank statements, showing sudden asset reallocation, internal emails referencing risk containment, and a recorded voicemail left by Daniel's mother 2 days after Emily was thrown out. "You should have stayed quiet," the voice said, company. "Elderly. Girls like you don't win." The courtroom was dead silent. The judge's expression hardened. "That recording," the judge said, "will be entered into the record." Charles Whitman's shoulders slumped slightly. He knew they were losing control. During a short recess, Daniel approached Michael near the corridor. "Name your price," Daniel hissed. "End this now." Michael didn't respond. Emily stepped forward instead. "You already decided my value," she said quietly. "Now the court decides yours." Daniel stared at her, stunned, not by anger, but by realization. She wasn't afraid anymore. Back in session, the judge delivered another blow. "This court orders a full forensic review of marital assets," he said. "Additionally, a temporary restraining order is placed against the respondent and his family regarding any direct or indirect contact with the petitioner." Daniel stood again, desperate. "This is unnecessary." The gavel struck. "One more interruption," the judge warned, "and you'll be removed." Daniel sank back into his chair. As the hearing concluded, the judge said something that echoed long after. "Mrs. Carter, courts exist to correct imbalances of power." He looked directly at her. "And today, that imbalance is being addressed." Outside the courtroom, reporters had begun to gather, quietly, cautiously. No names were spoken yet, no headlines written, but the shift was visible. Michael turned to Emily as they walked down the steps. "This case is no longer just about divorce." Emily nodded. "I know. It's about exposure," Michael continued, "and once exposure starts, it doesn't stop." Emily looked back at the courthouse doors. She thought of the night. She'd been pushed out with nothing, no suitcase, no money, no voice, and she realized something profound. They hadn't taken her power. That night, they had only delayed her discovering it, because now her name wasn't just on a file, it was on the record, and the system was finally listening. The courtroom was fuller than Emily expected, not because the case had been announced publicly, but because people inside the legal system had started paying attention. Senior attorneys sat quietly in the back rows. Clerks whispered to one another. Even the bailiff seemed more alert than usual. Emily took her seat beside Michael Reynolds, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had learned something important over the past weeks. Calm, unnerved people, far more than anger ever could. Across the aisle, Daniel Carter looked exhausted. Dark circles sat under his eyes, his tie loosened, his movements restless. His family was not present today. No mother offering cold stares, no father projecting authority. Just Daniel and his attorney, alone. The judge entered, all rise, as soon as everyone was seated again. The judge spoke, without preamble. "This court has reviewed preliminary findings from the forensic asset review." Daniel's attorney stiffened. Emily felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't move. The judge continued, "Initial analysis suggests multiple transfers occurred within days of the petitioner's removal from the marital home." Michael stood. "Your Honor, those transfers align precisely with the timeline of the eviction." The judge nodded. "That is correct." Daniel leaned forward. "Those were routine adjustments." The judge looked at him sharply. "Mr. Carter, you will speak only when addressed." Daniel fell silent. The judge turned another page. Additionally, the court notes communications referencing the petitioner as non-risk and unsupported. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Michael spoke again. "Your Honor, those terms reflect intent. The respondent believed my client lacked the means to challenge him." The judge's voice hardened. "That belief appears to have influenced his actions." Emily felt a strange calm settle over her. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was process. The judge looked directly at her. "Mrs. Carter, the court would like to hear from you." Emily stood slowly. For a moment, the room felt impossibly large. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," she said evenly. "I came here because I was left with nothing. Not just money, dignity." Daniel stared at the table. "I was told I had no family, no power, no place to stand." Emily continued, "But I learned something. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just the pause before truth speaks." The judge listened carefully. "When I was thrown out," Emily said, "they believed a story ended there." She met Daniel's eyes. It didn't. She sat down. The courtroom remained silent for several seconds. Then the judge spoke. "This court finds sufficient cause to expand the scope of review." Charles Whitman stood up, alarmed. "Your Honor, with respect." The judge raised a hand. "This includes reviewing the circumstances surrounding the petitioner's removal, the pressure applied afterward, and whether coercion was used to suppress legal action." Daniel's face drained of color. The judge continued, "Furthermore, the court orders temporary restitution, pending final judgment." Emily's breath caught. "Effective immediately," the judge said. "The petitioner is awarded exclusive access to marital funds for living expenses, legal costs, and recovery." Daniel's head snapped up. "You can't." The gavel struck. "Enough," the judge said sharply. "This is not a negotiation." As the courtroom recessed, Daniel finally broke. Outside, in the corridor, he cornered Emily. "This is spiraling," he said, his voice low and frantic. "You don't know what you're uncovering." Emily looked at him calmly. "You should have thought about that before you tried to erase me." His voice cracked. "They won't forgive this." Emily tilted her head slightly. "Who is they?" Daniel didn't answer. That silence told her everything. Later that evening, Michael called her. "There's something else," he said. "The trust's legal counsel has reached out." Emily closed her eyes. "I was wondering when that would happen." "They're monitoring the case," Michael continued. "They haven't intervened yet, but they're prepared to." "What does that mean?" Emily asked. "It means," Michael said carefully, "that if the court formally recognizes your status, the trust can assert independent legal standing." Emily sat down slowly. "Against Daniel? Against anyone who benefited from assuming you had no protection?" Emily stared at the wall. All her life, she'd been told she was alone. Now, the system itself was closing ranks around her. The next morning, headlines hadn't broken, but rumors had. Daniel's firm cancelled meetings. A partner resigned. Emails went unanswered. By the time Emily returned to court for the next procedural session, the atmosphere had shifted again. The judge entered, files in hand. "Before we proceed," he said, "this court acknowledges receipt of an amicus brief." Michael's eyes widened slightly. "Submitted by the Eleanor Trust." The judge continued. The courtroom froze. Even the clerks stopped moving. Daniel's attorney looked like he'd been punched. Emily felt a chill, but not fear, recognition. The judge went on. "The brief does not intervene, it observes." He looked directly at Emily, "and it requests that this court proceed without delay." Michael leaned toward her, whispering, "That's unprecedented." Emily whispered back, "So was being erased." The judge closed the file. "This court will not tolerate further obstruction," he said. "The record will reflect full transparency." Daniel slumped in his chair. For the first time, he looked small. Emily realized something then. The courtroom hadn't frozen because of anger. It hadn't frozen because of scandal. It had frozen because power had miscalculated. And power, when exposed, always panicked. As Emily left the building that day, sunlight cut through the clouds. She stopped at the top of the steps and took a long breath. She wasn't just surviving this anymore, she was reshaping it. And somewhere behind those stone walls, people were finally asking the question Daniel never wanted asked. What happens when the person you tried to erase turns out to be protected? The courthouse steps felt familiar now. Not intimidating, not overwhelming. Familiar. Emily Carter walked inside, with a calm that surprised even her. The whispers followed her again, but they sounded different this time. Lower, careful, as if people were afraid of saying the wrong thing too loudly, because now everyone knew, not the full story, not yet, but enough. Inside the courtroom, the tension was sharp enough to feel on the skin. Daniel Carter sat rigidly, his hands clenched together, so tightly his knuckles were white. His attorney looked nothing like the confident man from the first hearing. Papers were scattered, notes were crossed out, plans were unraveling. The judge entered and didn't. Waste a second. All rise. When everyone sat, the judge looked directly at Daniel. This court has reviewed the amicus brief submitted by the Eleanor Trust. Daniel swallowed hard. The judge continued, while the trust has not intervened directly, its presence confirms that this court is not dealing with a powerless petitioner. Michael Reynolds stood. Your Honor, we request that the record reflect the defense's repeated attempts to pressure my client into silence. After this confirmation, the judge nodded. It will. Emily felt something settle deep inside her. Validation didn't come with fireworks. It came with moments like this, quiet, official, undeniable. Daniel's attorney stood slowly. Your Honor, my client is willing to resolve this matter immediately. The judge raised an eyebrow. Wasn't he willing before? Silence. Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained. I just want this over. Emily looked at him. For the first time, she didn't see power. She saw fear. Michael turned slightly toward Emily. You don't have to agree to anything. Emily nodded. She already knew. The judge addressed her. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to hear the proposed settlement? Emily stood. Yes, she said, but I won't accept it. Daniel's head snapped up. You haven't even heard. Emily cut him off, her voice steady but firm. Because I already know what it's worth. The courtroom was silent. I was offered silence, Emily continued. I was offered money. I was red comfort in exchange for forgetting what was done to me. She looked at the judge, but this isn't just about me. The judge listened closely. It's about what happens when people with power decide someone else doesn't matter, Emily said. If I walk away quietly, they learn nothing. Daniel looked down. The judge exhaled slowly. Then we proceed. The next hours were relentless. Michael presented internal emails, language stripped of humanity, words like manageable, isolated, non-threatening, a plan laid bare, built on one assumption that Emily Carter would never fight back. The judge's expression hardened with every page. Daniel's attorney attempted objections, but they fell flat. When the judge finally spoke again, his voice carried weight. This court finds that the petitioner was subjected to deliberate coercion. Daniel's shoulders sagged. Furthermore, the judge continued, the attempt to leverage her perceived lack of support constitutes abuse of process. Emily closed her eyes briefly, not because she was overwhelmed, because she was relieved. The judge looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter, this court does not look kindly on those who weaponize power. Daniel tried to speak. No words came. The judge issued orders swiftly, expanded restitution, permanent protection, and referral of certain findings to regulatory authorities. Daniel's attorney sat back slowly. It was over. Not the case, not yet. But the illusion. Outside the courtroom, report. Urs waited. Cameras, questions, headlines forming before a single word was spoken. Michael leaned toward Emily. You don't have to say anything. Emily looked at the doors. All her life, she'd been told silence was safer. Now she knew better. She stepped forward. I'm not here to make statements, she said calmly. I'm here because the truth matters. No accusations, no dramatics, just fact. The reporters fell quiet. That evening, Emily returned to her small apartment and sat by the window. The city lights flickered below, indifferent and constant. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You didn't deserve what happened. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. She stared at it for a long time. Then another message arrived, and another. People she didn't know, people who had watched, people who had been afraid. Emily realized then that her case had already done something powerful. It had made silence uncomfortable. Michael called her later that night. The Trust's counsel wants to meet, he said. Not to control anything, just to acknowledge you. Emily smiled faintly. I spent my whole life being told I didn't exist. And now? Michael asked. And now, she said, they can't stop saying my name. She ended the call and looked out at the city again. Tomorrow would bring another hearing, another step, another page in the record. But tonight, Emily allowed herself something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace, not because everything was finished, but because the outcome was no longer in doubt. They had thrown her out with nothing. They had erased her, and in doing so they had triggered the one thing they could never control. The moment when the truth stops asking for permission, the final hearing arrived without fanfare. No crowd outside, no whispers in the hallway, just certainty. Emily Carter walked into the courtroom, knowing something she hadn't known before, not just how the case would end, but who she was when it did. Daniel Carter sat at the defense table, smaller somehow, not physically, but visibly diminished. His posture lacked resistance. His attorney spoke to him briefly, then closed the folder. In front of him, there would be no arguments today, no delays, no strategy left to deploy. The judge entered. All rise. When everyone sat again, the judge looked down at the file that had grown thicker with every hearing. This court is prepared to issue its final ruling, he said. Emily felt her breath steady, not held, not rushed. Steady. The judge spoke clearly, deliberately. This court finds that the petitioner, Emily Eleanor Carter, was unlawfully evicted from the marital home, deprived of personal property, and subjected to coercive conduct intended to suppress her legal rights. Daniel stared straight ahead. The court further finds, the judge continued, that the respondent's actions were influenced by the assumption that the petitioner lacked standing, protection, or recourse. The judge paused. That assumption was incorrect. A subtle shift moved through the room. Not shock, not drama, but recognition. The judge continued, the marriage between the parties is hereby dissolved. The words landed softly. This court orders full restitution of all personal property, retroactive spousal support, and compensation for unlawful removal. Emily closed her eyes for just a second, not to escape the moment, to absorb it. Additionally, the judge said, the court issues a permanent restraining order against the respondent and any associated parties, prohibiting further contact or interference. Daniel finally looked up. The judge met his eyes. Mr. Carter, he said, this court expects compliance, without exception. Daniel nodded once. No protest, no defiance. It was over. The gavel struck. As people began to rise and gather their belongings, the judge spoke once more. Mrs. Carter, Emily turned. The judge's voice softened, not with sympathy, but with respect. This court acknowledges the courage it takes to stand when standing was never meant to be an option. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the courthouse steps were empty. Michael Reynolds stood beside her as she took in the sky. Clear, bright, ordinary. "That's it," he said quietly. Emily smiled. "No," she replied. "That was the end." She took a breath. This is the beginning. They walked down the steps together. For the first time, since the night she'd been pushed into the cold. Emily felt something unmistakable, closure. Not because she had won, but because she had been heard. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to the small apartment she no longer thought of as temporary. She placed the court documents carefully into a folder, not hidden, not locked away, just stored, like a chapter that didn't need to be reread, to be remembered. Her phone buzzed. A message from Michael. The Trust's counsel confirmed no action required. They said the court did exactly what it was meant to do. Emily smiled. Another message followed. "They asked me to tell you something." She waited. Sometimes protection means stepping back and letting the truth speak for itself. Emily set the phone down and walked to the window. The city looked the same, but she wasn't. That evening, she received one final message from a number she hadn't seen in weeks. "Daniel, I didn't think you could do this." Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed a single reply. "Neither did you." She didn't block the number. She didn't need to. Some doors don't require force to stay closed. They stay closed because they no longer matter. Days later, Emily stood in a quiet park watching children play. Parents laugh. Life move forward without knowing her story. And she understood something fully, at last. Being erased hadn't broken her. It had revealed her. Power had mistaken silence for absence. The court had corrected that mistake, and the name that once froze a courtroom no longer needed to be spoken to carry weight, because Emily Eleanor Carter no longer needed permission to exist. They had thrown her out with nothing, and in doing so, they had given her the one thing they could never take back, her voice, the end